Clarence, New York, has always prided itself on its tranquility. This suburb of Buffalo, with a population of just over 9,000, was known for its well-kept homes, low crime rate, and strong family values. It was here, at 127 Main Street, that Grace Baptist Church was located, a small but cozy red brick building constructed in 1962. On Sunday morning, October 15, 2024, Pastor James Collins stepped up to the pulpit in front of 37 parishioners. When he arrived in Clarence 12 years ago, 80 people attended the church. The numbers didn't lie. The congregation was slowly but steadily declining. "Beloved brothers and sisters," James began in his deep, soothing voice, "today I want to talk to you about faithfulness, about how we remain faithful to the Lord even in difficult times." In the third row sat Olivia Collins, his wife, listening intently to every word. At 38, she had retained the natural beauty that had once captured the heart of the young seminarian. Her light hair was neatly pulled back into a bun. She wore a modest blue dress, and she wore no bright makeup, the image of the perfect pastor's wife. But Olivia was much more than just a pretty accessory to her husband's ministry. For 14 years, she had taught at Clarence Elementary School, and the parents of her students considered her one of the best teachers in the district. After the service, the congregation lingered as usual, discussing the upcoming fall festival and the repair of the church roof. Mrs. Henderson, a 70-year-old widow, approached Olivia. "Sweetheart, thank you for helping with Sunday school. The children just love your lessons." "It's my pleasure, Mrs. Henderson," Olivia smiled. "How is Tommy doing in math?" While his wife was talking to the parishioners, James counted the donations in a small room behind the altar. $230.47, less than last week. He sighed as he looked at the stack of unpaid bills on his desk. The electricity bill, the heating bill, the church loan payment, the cleaning lady's salary. The numbers hadn't added up for 6 months. The Collinses' house on Sherwood Drive looked like an illustration from a magazine about country living. A white 2-story house with blue shutters, a neat lawn, flower beds with chrysanthemums. Olivia had put her heart and soul into this house, turning it into a real family home. At the dinner table, they discussed their plans for the week. Olivia talked about the parent-teacher conference on Thursday, and James talked about his meeting with the church council on Wednesday. "Jim, you seem tense lately," Olivia said cautiously as she poured coffee. "Is everything okay?" James looked up from his plate. "Just church stuff. You know how it is. Maybe you should talk to the board about additional fundraising events? Or Olivia, please. I'll take care of it." She fell silent, but a flicker of concern crossed her eyes. 15 years of marriage had taught her to read her husband's moods, and something was wrong. James had become distant, distracted. Sometimes his phone would ring late at night, and he would go into another room to answer it. On Tuesday evening, James said he was going to visit a sick parishioner at the hospital in Buffalo. "Don't wait up for me, honey. It might take a while." But instead of the hospital, his Ford Explorer headed for the Seneca Niagara Casino. Over the past 8 months, these trips had become weekly, sometimes twice a week. It started innocently. Once after a pastor's conference in Buffalo, he stopped in just to look. But the thrill proved stronger than prudence. That evening, he lost $400, money intended for the purchase of new hymns. Returning home at 10:30, James rehearsed his explanation for his wife. "Father Miller asked me to stop by the cafe after visiting the hospital. We talked at length about working with young people." Olivia greeted him in her robe, a cup of tea in her hands. "How is Mr. Johnson?" James hesitated for a moment. "Mr. Johnson? Weren't you going to visit him in the hospital?" "Yes, of course. He's on the mend. The doctors are pleased." Olivia studied her husband's face. Something in his gaze made her wary. On Wednesday, at the church council meeting, the situation became critical. The church treasurer, Frank Morrison, laid out the financial documents on the table. Pastor Collins, we need to have a serious talk. We are already 3 months behind on our loan payments. The bank is threatening to begin foreclosure proceedings. James sat at the head of the table, feeling the eyes of the 5 council members on him. These were people who trusted him, respected him, and saw him as their spiritual leader. I understand the seriousness of the situation, he said. Perhaps we should consider selling some of the church's land. James, Mary Harris, the chair of the board, interrupted him. We've already discussed this. The church can barely accommodate the congregation as it is. We need to find ways to attract people, not reduce space. After the meeting, James remained alone in the church. He sat in the empty hall, staring at the crucifix above the altar. $42,000 in debt, plus a personal loan of $15,000 that he had secretly taken out 3 months ago, and another $8,000 that he owed to bookmakers. The phone rang, an unfamiliar number. Pastor Collins, this is Tony Vega. We met last month. James knew that voice. The man who lent money to those who couldn't get a loan from the bank. The interest rates were extortionate, but James was desperate. You have a week, Pastor. $12,000, including interest. Tony, please, I need a little more time. A week. And Pastor? Next time you borrow money, think twice. James slowly put down the phone. $12,000 in a week. He had $300 in his bank account at best. At home, Olivia was whistling a tune as she prepared dinner. She was in a good mood. Her 3rd graders had done especially well on their reading test today. How was the meeting? She asked when James entered the kitchen. Fine, the usual church stuff. Olivia turned to him. Over the years of living together, she had learned to see when her husband was hiding something. His shoulders were tense, his gaze evasive. Jim, if there's a problem, we can talk about it. We're a team, remember? He came up behind her and hugged her, burying his face in her hair. For a moment, he felt like that young seminarian who had fallen in love with a student in the education department, when everything was simple and honest. I know, honey. I'm just tired. But that night, after Olivia fell asleep, James lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling. Numbers swirled around in his head. $12,000 plus $15,000 in personal loans plus $42,000 in church debt. Almost $70,000. With his salary of $3,000 a month, it was an insurmountable mountain. The next day, while reading his morning prayers in his office, James's gaze fell on a folder with documents from the insurance company. Olivia's $500,000 life insurance policy, taken out a year ago at David Walker's insistence. Every family should be protected, the insurance agent had said at the time, especially when there's a mortgage and other obligations. James slowly opened the folder and reread the terms of the policy. $500,000 in the event of death. Double payment in the event of an accident. No deductible if death was the result of a crime. He quickly slammed the folder shut, as if he had burned himself. These thoughts were wrong, sinful. He was a pastor, a man of God, but the numbers wouldn't leave his head. On Thursday evening, Olivia stayed late at school for a parent-teacher conference. James said he had a meeting with a youth leader but went to the casino again. This time, luck smiled on him. He won $800 playing blackjack. The euphoria was intoxicating. Maybe it was a sign? Perhaps God was showing him the way to solve his problems? But by midnight, he had lost not only his winnings, but also another $1,200, the last money in the church account, intended for purchasing food for the needy. On his way home, James pulled over to the side of the road and cried. What was happening to him? How could he, a man who had dedicated his life to serving God, steal from his own church? At home, Olivia was waiting for him with a cup of hot cocoa. How was your meeting with Kyle? Good. We're planning a new program for teenagers. Olivia sat down next to him on the sofa. Jim, I'm worried. You've been kind of distant lately. And then, she paused, searching for the right words. The bank called yesterday. Something about a late payment? James's heart skipped a beat. It must be a technical error. I'll call them tomorrow. And I saw a bank statement on the table in your office. It said, Olivia, he said sharply, louder than he intended. I told you I'd take care of it. Don't worry about the finances. She recoiled as if he had hit her. In all their years of marriage, James had never raised his voice to her. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I'm just tired. Let's talk tomorrow. But Olivia didn't sleep until 3 in the morning, listening to her husband's footsteps downstairs. Something was very wrong. James was changing, and she didn't understand why. On Friday morning, while James was in the shower, Olivia went into his office. On the desk were bills she hadn't seen before, a credit card with an $11,000 balance, a letter from the bank about a late mortgage payment, and strangely, a parking receipt from Seneca Niagara Casino from the night before last. The very night he was supposed to be meeting with the youth leader. Olivia's hands trembled as she reread the documents. A casino? James hated gambling, always saying it was a sin. Their church even banned fundraising lotteries. What are you doing? Olivia turned around. James was standing in the doorway, his hair still damp from the shower. There was something new in his gaze, a coldness she had never seen before. Jim, I need to know the truth. What's happening with our money? And what does this casino receipt mean? A long pause. James slowly entered the study and closed the door. Sit down, Olivia. We need to talk. The conversation in the study lasted 2 hours. James told his wife only part of the truth about the church's debts, the decline in parishioners, the pressure from the council. He lied about the casino, calling it a one-time mistake after a stressful day. He kept quiet about the extent of his debts. Why didn't you tell me? Olivia sat across from him, her arms wrapped around her knees. We could have figured something out. I could have taken on extra tutoring hours. This is my responsibility, James said firmly. I'm the head of the family. I have to deal with financial problems. But Olivia was not one to give up easily. The next day, she met her best friend, Rebecca Stone, at the Windrose Cafe on Main Street. They had been friends since college, and Rebecca had always been the voice of reason in her life. He's lying to you, Liv, Rebecca said, stirring her coffee. People don't start gambling at casinos because of one stressful day. It's an illness. Rebecca knew what she was talking about. Her father had lost the family home when she was 16. She had studied all the signs of gambling addiction. Have you noticed any other changes? Secret phone calls? Money disappearing? Lies about where he's been? Olivia nodded, her eyes filling with tears. Yes, all of that. But he's a pastor, Becky. How could he? Addiction doesn't choose a profession, Rebecca said gently. You have to protect yourself. Check his bank accounts, credit cards, find out how bad things really are. Meanwhile, James sat in David Walker's office in the Buffalo Savings Building on Sheridan Drive. Walker wasn't just an insurance agent. He specialized in complex financial solutions for people in desperate situations. A home equity loan is a serious step, Pastor, David said as he looked over the documents. Your house is valued at $280,000, and the mortgage is still $140,000. We can give you up to $100,000. That would be enough to pay off all his debts and start over. But James knew he wouldn't be able to stop. His addiction was stronger than his willpower. There's one thing, David added, lowering his voice. Given your situation, maybe you should increase your life insurance, both yours and your wife's. You never know what might happen. Something in David's tone made James look at him more closely. Walker was known in the neighborhood as a man who helped people solve problems in unconventional ways. Rumor had it that he didn't just work with insurance policies. What do you mean? Nothing specific. Just thinking about protecting your family. Your wife is young and healthy. Insurance for her would be inexpensive, but the payout could be substantial. James signed the loan documents, but David's words echoed in his head all the way home. On Wednesday evening, Olivia came home upset. At school, the principal had hinted at possible cutbacks due to reduced funding. "Maybe it's a sign," she said at dinner. "Maybe we should move? There are more opportunities for both of us in Buffalo." "Move?" James felt panic rising. "Olivia, I can't just leave the church. I have commitments to the community." "What commitments?" "The church is falling apart. There are fewer and fewer parishioners. And our finances." She didn't finish the sentence, but the meaning was clear. That evening, after Olivia went to bed, James went out on the porch and took out his phone. He found the number of a detective agency in Buffalo on the internet and stared at the screen for a long time, not daring to press the call button. On Thursday, Rebecca stopped by the school to visit her friend. She worked at the First Niagara Bank branch in downtown Clarence and knew the financial situation of most families in town. "Liv, I checked something through our contacts at other banks," she said quietly in the staff room when no one else was around. "Your family is in serious trouble. An $80,000 home equity loan was taken out this week, overdue credit card payments, and the church is in debt too." Olivia turned pale. "80,000? But he didn't say anything to me. There's something else. I saw his car in the Seneca Casino parking lot several times last month. Liv, I think he has a serious problem." That evening, Olivia waited for her husband at home with printouts of bank statements that Rebecca had helped her obtain. When James walked in, she was sitting at the kitchen table with the documents in front of her. $80,000, James, against the collateral of our house. You mortgaged our house and didn't even tell me. James slowly took off his jacket. The moment of truth had come sooner than he expected. "It's temporary. I'll pay the money back." "With what? Your $3,000 a month salary? Jim, at that rate, we'll be paying it off for the rest of our lives." "I have a plan." "What plan? To gamble even more at the casino?" Olivia stood up, the papers falling to the floor. "Yes, I know. Rebecca saw your car there. How much did you lose, James? How much?" He didn't answer, and that was the answer in itself. "We have to get help," Olivia said, trying to pull herself together. "There are support groups for people with gambling addictions. We can get through this together." "I'm not a gambler," James exploded. "This is just a temporary difficulty. One big win and all my problems will be solved." Olivia looked at her husband and felt like she was looking at a stranger. Where was her kind, honest husband? The man who taught others to live by the commandments? On Saturday morning, James met with David Walker again, but this time in a small bar on the outskirts of Buffalo, far from familiar eyes. "I've been thinking about what you said about additional insurance," James began, nervously twirling the ring on his finger. David nodded. "And what conclusion did you come to? If, hypothetically, something happened to Olivia, how long would it take for the insurance to pay out?" "In the case of natural death, about a month. In the case of an accident or other circumstances, an investigation may be required. But if everything is clear, the money is paid out quickly." "What if there are debts? Can creditors claim the insurance?" "Not life insurance. Those funds are protected. It goes straight to the beneficiary." James nodded, making mental notes. $500,000. That would be enough to cover all the debts and still have enough left over for a new life. "There's one more thing," David said, leaning closer. "I have a friend who specializes in difficult situations. If you need advice on how to best protect your family, James got the hint." "I'm not ready for that kind of conversation." "Of course. But if you change your mind, you know where to find me." On Sunday after the service, Olivia noticed a change in the behavior of the parishioners. Conversations quieted down when she approached. People looked at her with pity or sympathy. News spread quickly in a small town. Mrs. Collins, Mrs. Peterson, an elderly woman who worked at the bank, approached her. "If you need any help, our community will support you." Olivia realized that everyone knew about their financial problems. Shame burned her cheeks. At home, she called Rebecca. "Becky, I'm scared." James has changed completely. Yesterday, he spent the whole day studying some documents and writing something down. When I asked him about it, he said he was planning a new sermon. Maybe you should see a family counselor or talk to his mentor from seminary. He won't agree to that. He says God will help him deal with everything. But that evening, God seemed silent. James sat in his study until 3 in the morning, making plans. On a piece of paper, he wrote down Olivia's schedule, the routes she took home from school, the time when the neighbors usually went to bed, the layout of the house. On Monday morning, he burned these notes in the fireplace, but the thoughts continued to spin in his head. David was right. If done correctly, no one would suspect anything. An accident or a burglary that went wrong. Olivia noticed that her husband had begun to study her habits with new attention. "What time do you usually come home on Thursdays? Why do you always park on the left side of the driveway? Do you always check the locks before going to bed?" When she asked why he needed to know, he would give some vague answer about being concerned for her safety. On Tuesday, Rebecca met with Olivia again, this time at her home. James was away, attending a meeting with church creditors in Buffalo. At least, that's what he said. "Liv, I want you to think about something," Rebecca said seriously, sitting down on the living room sofa. "If the situation doesn't improve, maybe it's time to protect yourself legally." "What do you mean?" "Divorce." Before he loses the house, Olivia shook her head sharply. "Rebecca, no. I made a vow before God. For better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, and him? Does he remember his vows when he's spending your money at the casino?" The question hung in the air. Olivia stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street of Clarence. Children were playing in the playground across the street, their laughter carrying through the autumn air. "I love him, Becky. No matter what, I know. But love doesn't have to mean you let him destroy your life." That same evening, James met with Tony Vega in a dark alley behind a restaurant in Buffalo's industrial district. Tony was a short man with hard eyes and a scar on his chin. "Time's up, Pastor. Time's up. I have a plan to get the money." "A lot of money. Just give me a little more time." Tony smirked. "A plan? What kind of plan could a bankrupt pastor have?" James hesitated, then decided, "Insurance. I have access to a large insurance payout, but I need time to arrange everything." "Life insurance?" Tony became serious. "That's a dangerous game, Pastor. If something goes wrong, nothing will go wrong. I've got it all figured out." Tony stared at him for a long minute. 2 weeks, that's all I can give you. And Pastor, if you're lying to me, your problems will be a lot more serious than your debts. On Wednesday, Olivia found a business card for a private investigator from Buffalo in James's jacket pocket. When she asked him about it, he said that a parishioner who was having problems with his wife's infidelity had given him the card. But Olivia no longer believed his explanations. On Thursday evening, when James left again for a church meeting, Olivia searched his office. In a locked desk drawer, she found documents for a home equity loan, receipts from various casinos, and, most shocking of all, an increased life insurance policy for $800,000. The date of issue was last week. Her hands were shaking as she photographed the documents with her phone and sent them to Rebecca. Rebecca called back in 5 minutes. "Liv, you need to leave the house immediately. This looks very bad. Do you think he might?" Olivia couldn't bring herself to say the words. "I think you're in danger. Pack a bag and come to my place." Right now, but Olivia didn't make it in time. James came home earlier than usual and found her in the study with the documents in her hands. "What are you doing?" "James, I need the truth, the whole truth. $800,000 in insurance? Why?" He slowly closed the study door. The look in his eyes made Olivia retreat to the window. "Sit down, Olivia. We need to have a serious talk. Friday, November 3rd. James was sitting in David Walker's office for the third time in 2 weeks. On the table lay new documents, an application to increase Olivia's life insurance coverage to $1,200,000. That's a lot of money, Pastor, David said, tapping his pen on the papers. The insurance company will require a medical examination and financial justification. Olivia is healthy, and the justification. James took out the loan documents. Mortgage, loans, church obligations. If something happens to me, she'll need the money. David studied the papers carefully. I see. But why not your insurance? You're the main breadwinner. Mine has been increased too, to $1.5 million. But with Olivia, she's young and healthy. The premiums will be lower. It was a lie. James knew that his own insurance was irrelevant to his plan. David filled out the forms in silence. I'll need her signature, and she needs to have a medical exam within a week. She agreed. We discussed it at home. Another lie. Olivia knew nothing about the new documents. That same day, Olivia met with the school principal, Patricia Morgan. They sat in the principal's small office, discussing the upcoming budget cuts. Olivia, you are one of our best teachers, Patricia said. But the district is requiring a 20% reduction in spending. I'll have to let 3 teachers go. I understand. When will you make your decision? By the end of the month. But I wanted to let you know personally, given the difficulties in your family situation, Olivia realized that the rumors had even reached the school administration. In a small town, it was impossible to hide financial problems. That evening, the atmosphere at home was tense. James paced nervously around the living room, while Olivia prepared dinner in an unusual silence. Liv, we need to sign some insurance documents, he finally said. What documents? David suggested increasing our coverage. Given our circumstances, it would be wise. Olivia turned to him. James, we don't even have money for groceries, and you want to increase our insurance premiums? It's an investment in our future. What future? Olivia's voice rose. You lost our savings. You mortgaged the house. The church is on the verge of bankruptcy. What future? James paused. His gaze flashed with the coldness Olivia had seen before. You don't understand the magnitude of the situation. Then explain it to me. Tell me the truth. How much do you owe? A long pause. James sat down across from his wife at the kitchen table. $140,000, plus interest. Olivia felt the ground slip away from under her feet. My God, James, that's more than our house is worth. I know. That's why we need insurance. Insurance won't solve your addiction problem. You need help, treatment. I need time, he exploded. One big win, and I'll pay it all back. Can't you hear yourself? That's not my husband talking. That's the disease talking. James stood up so abruptly that the chair fell backward. Don't you dare tell me I'm sick. I'm doing everything I can to save our family. Save? You're destroying us. On Saturday, while Olivia was at the market, James met with a man David introduced as a security consultant. They sat in a car in the empty parking lot of an abandoned factory in Buffalo's industrial zone. Accidents happen every day, said the consultant, a thin man in his 50s with cold eyes. A burglary that went wrong, a car accident, drowning. It has to look natural, James said, struggling to get the words out. Of course. The main thing is an alibi. You can't be around when it happens. The man named his price. $20,000 up front, another $30,000 after the job. I don't have that kind of money right now. Then do it yourself. But remember, you only get one chance. If you screw up, it's all over. Sunday, November 5th. James's last sermon was about forgiveness. He talked about how God forgives even the most serious sins of those who sincerely repent. Sometimes, he said, looking directly at Olivia in the front row, we have to make difficult decisions for the good of our loved ones. Sometimes, love requires sacrifice. After the service, Olivia took him aside. What was that sermon about, Jim? just some thoughts on the nature of love and sacrifice. But there was something final in his voice that made her wary. That evening, Rebecca called Olivia. "Liv, I found out something through some contacts in the police. Your husband was seen in the company of some shady characters in Buffalo, and someone else was inquiring about both of you at the bank." "Inquiring?" "Credit history, insurance policies, all your financial information. This doesn't sound like a normal loan check." Olivia felt a chill in her stomach. "Becky, I'm scared. Come to my place. Right now." But Olivia heard the front door open. James was home. "I can't right now. Let's talk tomorrow." On Monday morning, James walked his wife to school, which was unusual. They usually drove to work separately. "I just wanted to spend more time with you," he explained when she asked. But Olivia noticed how carefully he studied the road, the travel time, and places where he could stop unnoticed. That evening, the decisive conversation took place. Olivia found her husband in the garage, where he was looking for something in some old boxes. "James, we need to talk. Really talk." He straightened up, holding an old baseball bat from college in his hands. "About what?" "About the truth. About what you're up to." James slowly placed the bat on the workbench. "I don't know what you're talking about. The increased insurance, meetings with shady people, your interest in my schedule. Jim, I'm not stupid." They stood facing each other in the dim light of the garage. Between them lay 15 years of marriage, shared dreams, promises that once seemed unbreakable. "What do you want to hear?" he asked quietly. "That you're not planning what I think you are." A long pause. James looked at his wife, the woman he once loved more than life itself. But the debts weighed on him like a physical burden. Tony Vega wasn't joking about the consequences, and the church council threatened to expel him from the ministry. "Olivia, if you only knew how much I'm suffering. I didn't want it to go this far." "Then stop. We can get help. There are programs for people with gambling addictions, counselors. It's too late for that." There was such hopelessness in his voice that Olivia felt real fear. "James, promise me. Promise me you won't do anything stupid." He looked at her for a long time, then nodded. "I promise." But when they entered the house, James knew he had lied. The plan had already formed in his head. Tomorrow evening, Tuesday, Olivia would be home alone. He had an alibi, a meeting with the church council in Buffalo that was supposed to last until late at night. Several witnesses would confirm his presence. Burglary. It was rare in Clarence, but not impossible. The burglar had taken the lady of the house by surprise. Olivia had tried to resist, a tragic accident. That night, James lay next to his sleeping wife and felt something like peace for the first time in weeks. Tomorrow, it would all be over. The debts would be paid off, the church would be saved, and he could start a new life. Olivia would no longer suffer because of his problems. He had almost convinced himself that he was doing it for her sake. On Tuesday morning, James was unusually affectionate. He brought Olivia coffee in bed and kissed her goodbye longer than usual. "See you tonight," he said. "Don't wait up for me for dinner. The meeting may run late." Olivia watched him leave and felt uneasy. Something about his behavior felt like a goodbye. At school, she couldn't concentrate on her lessons. The children noticed her distraction. "Mrs. Collins, are you sad?" 7-year-old Emma asked after reading class. "Just tired, dear. Tomorrow will be better." But Olivia wasn't sure there would be a tomorrow. During lunch break, she called Rebecca. "Becky, something's wrong with James. He's acting strange, like he's saying goodbye. Do you want to stay at my place tonight?" "Maybe. I'll call you tonight." At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, James was sitting in his car in the parking lot at Lake Ontario, 20 minutes from home. He had 4 hours before his meeting with the church council in Buffalo. Enough time to go home, do what he needed to do, and get to the city on time. He took out his phone and reviewed his plan one last time. Drive up to the house through the woods behind the yard. Enter through the back door. The lock had been broken for a month, and they were all going to fix it. Olivia usually came home at 4:30 and went straight to the kitchen to cook dinner. James closed his eyes and tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he thought about numbers. $1,200,000. Minus all the debts, there was still over $1 million left. Enough to start a new life in another state, find a new church, and become the person he used to be. At 4 o'clock, he started walking toward the house. Olivia came home at the usual time and immediately noticed that James's car was not in the driveway. Good. She wanted to be alone, to think about what was happening to their marriage, to their life. She entered the house through the front door and headed for the kitchen. She needed to make something simple for dinner, then call Rebecca and decide whether to go stay with her for the night or stay home and try to talk to her husband again. On the kitchen table was an envelope with her name written in James's handwriting. "Dear Olivia," she read, "I'm sorry for everything. I know I've ruined our lives with my decisions. You deserve a better husband than me. By the time you read this letter, it will all be over. Remember me as I once was, not as I have become. I love you. James." Olivia's hands trembled. The letter sounded like a suicide note. Was he really going to kill himself? She grabbed the phone and dialed her husband's number. It went straight to voicemail. Then she tried to call Rebecca, but the connection was bad. Olivia rushed to the window and looked out onto the street. Mrs. Henderson's house was dark. The old lady usually went to bed early. The house on the right also seemed empty. Suddenly, she heard the sound of the back door opening. "Jim?" she called. "Is that you?" Silence. Then slow footsteps down the hallway. Olivia clutched the phone in her hand and moved cautiously toward the living room. Something was wrong. James always came in through the front door and called out to her right away. "Jim, you're scaring me." A figure appeared in the doorway. It was her husband, but the expression on his face was unlike anything she had ever seen before. His eyes were empty, devoid of all the emotions that made him the man she loved. "I'm sorry, Olivia," he said quietly, "but there's no other way." Tuesday, November 7th, 4:47 p.m. The house at 247 Sherwood Drive looked peaceful from the outside. Autumn leaves fell softly on the neat lawn that Olivia loved so much. Light shone through the kitchen window, creating the illusion of domestic bliss. Inside, a tragedy was unfolding. The struggle had been brief but desperate. Kitchen chairs were overturned, shards of a broken cup littered the floor, and traces of blood stained the white tiles. Olivia Collins lay motionless near the kitchen island, her eyes open, staring at the ceiling. A blow to the head with a heavy object had been fatal. The killer worked quickly and methodically. He pulled out the drawers and scattered their contents across the floor. He knocked over a lamp in the living room. He pulled out the drawers from the dresser in the bedroom and scattered the clothes. He took Olivia's laptop and her jewelry, a wedding ring with a small diamond, gold earrings from her grandmother, and a chain with a cross. The back door was left open. It was a classic case of burglary that didn't go according to plan. At 5:23 p.m., Mrs. Henderson, a neighbor, returned home after a doctor's appointment and noticed the Collinses' back door open. She tried to call Olivia, but no one answered. Concerned, she called the police. Detective Michael Thornton received the call at 5:35 p.m. as he was finishing up a car theft case at the Main Street station. 45 years on the force had taught him to distinguish between routine incidents and something serious. When the dispatcher mentioned a possible murder, Thornton felt a familiar knot in his stomach. The crime scene greeted him with chaos. Young officers had already cordoned off the area with yellow tape, and a photographer was taking pictures. Thornton put on gloves and cautiously entered the house. He had seen hundreds of crime scenes in his career, but the dead woman on the kitchen floor still made him grit his teeth. Olivia Collins had been his niece's teacher, a good woman who didn't deserve this end. "What do we have?" he asked Sergeant Rogers. Olivia Collins, 38 years old, elementary school teacher, blunt force trauma to the head, time of death preliminarily between 4 and 5. Neighbor found the back door open and called us. Thornton looked around. A classic burglary scene. Furniture overturned, things scattered, valuables missing. But something bothered him. Where's the husband? Pastor Collins is at a meeting in Buffalo. We're trying to reach him. Thornton walked through the house, studying every detail. The back door had definitely been broken into. There were marks from a crowbar on the doorframe. But the lock was old, almost broken. It was strange that people would leave such weak protection in place. In the living room, an overturned vase lay on the floor, but the flowers in it were fresh, as if it had been put there recently. On the coffee table were 2 cups of coffee, both barely touched. Rogers, call the medical examiner and find Pastor Collins. I need to talk to him. At 6:45 p.m., James Collins arrived home accompanied by a patrol car. Thornton watched him from the window. A tall, middle-aged man jumped out of a Ford Explorer and rushed toward the house, but the police stopped him at the barrier tape. "My wife! Where's my wife?" Thornton stepped forward. "Pastor Collins? Detective Thornton, I need to talk to you." "Where's Olivia? What happened to her?" "Let's go to the car, sir." James listened to the detective's explanation with growing horror on his face. Tears, trembling hands, broken questions. It all seemed like a natural reaction from a shocked husband. "Who could have done this?" he asked again and again. "Olivia never hurt anyone. She's a teacher, for God's sake." "Pastor, I need to ask you a few questions. Where were you after 3 o'clock today?" "At a church council meeting in Buffalo." "In the conference room of the Marriott Hotel on Delaware Avenue." "The meeting started at 4:30. "Who can confirm that?" James named 5 council members from different churches. Thornton wrote down the information, but something bothered him. "Where were you before 4:30? "Driving to Buffalo. I stopped for a bite to eat at McDonald's on Sheridan Drive around 3:30. "Did you keep the receipt?" "No, I didn't think it would be necessary." Thornton nodded. "Pastor, did your wife have any enemies? Anyone who might have threatened her?" "No one. Absolutely no one. Everyone loved her." "What about financial problems?" "Debts?" James's face changed. "A few minor difficulties. Nothing serious." "How minor?" "Detective, my wife just..." James's voice broke. "Can we talk about this tomorrow?" Thornton allowed him to stay with friends for the night. The house was a crime scene, but the detective continued to work late into the night. By midnight, he had a preliminary picture. Time of death, between 4 and 5 p.m. The murder weapon had not been found. A laptop, jewelry, and about $200 in cash were missing. There were no signs of forced entry except for the back door. But the details bothered him. Why didn't the burglar take the expensive TV in the living room? Why rummage through the bedroom if the goal was cash and jewelry? And most importantly, the blow was delivered with such force that it killed instantly. This did not seem like a panicked burglar. On Wednesday morning, Thornton began checking James's alibi. The meeting at the Marriott Hotel did take place, and Pastor Collins was present. But one of the witnesses, Reverend Michael Davis, said something interesting. James looked nervous. He kept looking at his watch, and he was absent for 10 to 15 minutes at the beginning of the meeting. He said he was stuck in traffic. Thornton checked the traffic situation that day. There was no traffic on the route from Clarence to Buffalo. The McDonald's on Sheridan Drive had surveillance cameras, but the recordings were only kept for 24 hours. By the time of the request, they had already been overwritten. In the afternoon, Thornton met with Rebecca Stone at the bank. She looked shaken, her eyes red from crying. "I should have insisted that she leave him," Rebecca said. "I knew something was wrong." "What exactly worried you?" Olivia talked about her husband's strange behavior. He studied her habits, her schedule, and recently, he increased her life insurance. Thornton looked up. "Insurance?" "A very large amount." Olivia was scared. She thought he was planning to commit suicide, but now I understand. Do you think he could have killed his own wife? Rebecca paused. Detective, James Collins has a serious gambling addiction. He owed a lot of money, and Olivia's life insurance I checked through our banking connections. $1,200,000. That evening, Thornton met with James again, this time at the police station. The pastor looked exhausted, but he carried himself with the dignity of a grieving widower. Pastor, I need to ask you a few more questions. Of course. I want you to find the person who did this. Tell me about your finances. Do you have any debts? James tensed. A few small church obligations. Nothing out of the ordinary. What about personal debts? Credit cards? Loans? Detective, what does our finances have to do with this? My wife was killed by a robber. Perhaps, but I need the full picture. Are there people you owe money to? A long pause. There are some church loans. How much? It's hard to explain. Thornton placed the photographs of the documents Rebecca had given him on the table. An $80,000 home equity loan, credit cards with a total debt of $30,000, church debts of $42,000. That doesn't look like a small amount of debt. James's face turned pale. Where did you get these documents? Pastor Collins, you lied to me about your debts. What else have you lied to me about? I didn't lie. I just didn't think it was important to the investigation. Your wife's life insurance policy for $1.2 million. When was it taken out? A month ago. David Walker advised me to increase the coverage. Did your wife know about the increase? James hesitated a second too long. Of course she knew. We discussed it. Thornton noticed the pause. Pastor, let's go over your movements yesterday again. What time did you leave home? Around 3, maybe a little later. Straight to the meeting? Yes, I stopped for a bite to eat on the way. At McDonald's on Sheridan Drive? Yes, but the meeting was at 4:30. The drive takes 40 minutes at most. Why leave so early? James hesitated again. I wanted to arrive early, to look over some documents. What documents? Church financial reports. Thornton took notes. Each answer raised new questions. On Thursday morning, medical examiner Dr. Susan Lim provided a preliminary report. Death occurred between 4:15 and 4:45 p.m. A single blow with a heavy object, probably a baseball bat or similar weapon. No defensive wounds, which meant it was a sudden attack. Interestingly, Dr. Lim added, there is no attacker's DNA under the victim's fingernails. Usually, there are traces left behind after a struggle like this. So she knew the killer? Possibly. Or the attack was so sudden that she didn't have time to resist. Thornton returned to the house for a second look. This time, he noticed details he had missed yesterday. In the garage, there were dust marks in the shape of a baseball bat on the workbench. The bat itself was missing. In the kitchen, he found a note that Olivia had been reading before she died. It was a letter from her husband that sounded like a suicide note. But if James was planning to kill himself, why write to his wife? And where was he? On Friday, Thornton summoned James to the station again. This time, the pastor brought a lawyer with him, Robert Clark, a Buffalo attorney specializing in criminal cases. My client wants to help with the investigation, Clark said, but we are concerned about the direction of your questions. Pastor Collins, did you write this letter? Thornton showed him the note found in the kitchen. James read it and nodded. Yes, but it's not what you think. What is it then? I was planning to leave town. My financial problems had become unbearable. I wanted to disappear, to start a new life somewhere else. Leave your wife? I thought she would be better off without me. The insurance would cover the debts. The lawyer put his hand on his client's shoulder. James, don't say anything else. But Thornton had already noticed a contradiction. Pastor, if you were planning to disappear, why did you come home? The meeting in Buffalo ended at 6. You had plenty of time to just leave. I changed my mind. I decided to go back and explain everything to Olivia. And when you got home, the door was open? Yes, I knew right away that something was wrong. But you didn't call the police. Your neighbor did that half an hour before you arrived. James was confused. I was in shock. I saw her body and couldn't think clearly. Thornton closed his notebook. Pastor, don't leave town. I'll need to ask you some more questions. After James and his lawyer left, Thornton sat in his office analyzing the facts. The motive was obvious: huge debts and a large insurance policy. The alibi was shaky. The time between leaving home and the start of the meeting was unconfirmed. His behavior was suspicious. Lies about his finances, a strange letter to his wife, contradictory explanations. But there was no direct evidence. He needed to dig deeper. On Saturday, he met with David Walker at his office. The insurance agent looked nervous when Thornton introduced himself. I want to talk about Olivia Collins' insurance. That's confidential information. This is a murder investigation, mister. Walker David took out a folder. The policy was increased a month ago, from $200,000 to $1,200,000. On whose initiative? Pastor Collins said they discussed it with his wife. They wanted more protection because of debts. Did Mrs. Collins sign the documents? David showed him the signature. The handwriting looked correct, but Thornton noticed slight differences from Olivia's signature samples in school documents. Mr. Walker, did you ever discuss hypothetical insurance scenarios with Pastor Collins? What do you mean? For example, what would happen if his wife died? David turned pale. Detective, I'm just an insurance agent. I explained policy terms to clients, but Thornton saw the fear in his eyes and realized that this man knew more than he was saying. On Saturday evening, sitting at home with a glass of whiskey, Thornton pondered the case. Everything pointed to James Collins, but there wasn't enough evidence to arrest him. He needed one detail that would tie everything together. Monday, November 13th. The breakthrough in the case came unexpectedly. Thornton received a call from an employee at the city landfill. Detective, we found something that might interest you. A baseball bat in a container that was hauled away from Sherwood Drive last week. Thornton rushed to the landfill. The bat was wrapped in a black garbage bag, and there were still traces of blood on the handle. Forensic experts confirmed that the blood belonged to Olivia Collins. Partial fingerprints were also found on the handle. The prints belonged to James Collins, the expert reported 2 days later, a 12-point match. But that wasn't enough. The defense attorney could argue that the bat belonged to the family and that James naturally picked it up. Additional evidence was needed. Rebecca Stone provided it. On Wednesday, she came to Thornton with Olivia's phone, which she had found in her car. Olivia left it with me last Friday when we met. She forgot to take it with her. Thornton found correspondence between the friends from the last 2 weeks on the phone. Olivia wrote about her husband's strange behavior, his interest in her schedule, and her fear for her safety. He asks what time I get home, if I check the locks, if I'll be alone in the evening. It scares me, Olivia wrote 3 days before her death. The last message was sent on Tuesday at 4:39 p.m., 8 minutes before the estimated time of death. Jim is home. Something is wrong. If anything happens. The message was cut off mid-sentence. A handwriting expert confirmed that Olivia's signature on the enlarged insurance policy was forged. Comparing it to samples from school, he found several characteristic differences in the writing of the letters. The forgery is skillful, said the expert, but there are signs that it was signed by a man trying to imitate a woman's handwriting. On Thursday, Thornton arrested David Walker on suspicion of fraud. Under pressure, the insurance agent confessed to participating in the scheme. James came to me in desperation, David said in the interrogation room. He said he was willing to do anything to solve his financial problems. I offered him an option. What option? At first, just to increase the insurance. But then he asked about payment terms, about what happens in the event of violent death. I understood where he was going with this, and what did you do? I helped him fill out the paperwork. I forged his wife's signature, and when he asked how to arrange an accident, I gave him the contact details of a person. What person? David gave the name and address of the security consultant, a former police officer who now offered dubious services. Friday, November 17th, Thornton obtained an arrest warrant for James Collins. He found the pastor in the church, where he was preparing for Sunday service. "Pastor Collins, you are under arrest on suspicion of the murder of Olivia Collins." James did not resist. He was sitting in his office, looking at a photograph of his wife on the table, when the detective entered. "I knew this day would come," he said quietly. At the police station, after his lawyer had once again explained his rights to him, James unexpectedly asked to be left alone with the detective. "I want to tell the truth," he said. "The whole truth." Thornton turned on the tape recorder. Pastor Collins is giving his statement voluntarily, in the presence of his lawyer. "I killed Olivia," James began, his voice trembling, "but not because I didn't love her. I did, but the debts were eating me alive. $140,000 plus interest. People were threatening me. I saw only one way out." He told everything, about his meetings with David Walker, about the consultant, about how he had planned the murder for weeks. "I came home at 4:20. Olivia was reading my note. She understood what I was planning and said she wouldn't let me do it, that she would go to the police. And what happened next? We argued. I tried to explain that I was doing it for both of us, that there was no other way. But she wouldn't listen. She said it was better to lose the house than to live with a murderer." James fell silent, staring at the table. She ran to the phone. "I grabbed a bat from the garage. I didn't want to kill her. I just wanted to stop her. But the blow was too strong." "And the staging?" "I panicked. I knocked over the furniture, took her jewelry and laptop. I threw everything into the lake on the way to Buffalo. I thought it would look like a robbery." The confession was recorded, signed, and certified. James Collins was officially charged with first-degree murder. The trial began on January 15th, 2025. The case caused a huge stir in the community. A pastor who killed his wife for money became a symbol of moral decay. Prosecutor Jennifer Martinez methodically presented the evidence: financial documents, forged signatures, the murder weapon, contradictory testimony. The defense tried to prove temporary insanity due to stress and gambling addiction. Rebecca Stone was a key witness for the prosecution. She talked about Olivia's fears in her final days, about how James studied his wife's habits. "She was afraid of him," Rebecca said, looking directly at James. "My best friend was afraid of her own husband, and I couldn't protect her." The jury deliberated for 2 days. On February 2nd, they returned a verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. Judge Robert Hayes sentenced James Collins to life in prison without the possibility of parole. "You betrayed not only your wife's trust," the judge said, "but also the trust of an entire community that saw you as a spiritual leader. Your actions have caused irreparable damage to people's faith in goodness and justice." God's Grace Church closed a month after the trial. The parishioners dispersed to other communities, and the building was put up for sale. The house on Sherwood Drive was bought by a young family from Buffalo who knew nothing about its history. Rebecca Stone transferred to a bank branch in Rochester. She could no longer live in Clarence, where every corner reminded her of her friend. Detective Thornton received thanks from the department for solving the case, but he did not feel victorious. Another family destroyed, another life cut short by greed and despair. In his cell at the Etava Correctional Facility, James Collins reads the Bible every day. He still doesn't understand how he ended up murdering the woman he loved. His gambling addiction was treated, but the price was too high. Sometimes at night he dreams of Olivia, young, laughing, just as she was in college. In these dreams, they are happy again, with no debts, no problems, no terrible night in November. But in the morning, he wakes up in a prison cell and remembers the truth. He killed the only person who truly loved him for money he will never receive. The story of James and Olivia Collins became a warning to other families. Clarence's school now has a memorial plaque in honor of Olivia, a teacher who gave children a love of knowledge and a belief in goodness. But the most frightening thing about this story is not the murder itself, but how the moral principles of a man who was trusted by his parishioners were gradually destroyed. James Collins lost himself long before he raised his hand against his wife. The murder was only the final point in a long series of betrayals, first of God, then of his parishioners, then of his wife, and finally of himself. The prison psychologist wrote in his file, "The patient shows deep remorse but cannot explain the motives for his actions. He claims that he does not remember himself during that period. The prognosis for rehabilitation is cautious." The truth was that James Collins remembered everything very well. Every lie, every betrayal, every second of that November night. And that was worse than any punishment the court could have imposed.